Good morning and welcome to the 17th meeting in 2013 of the Finance-Committe of the Scottish Parliament. And can I first of all remind all those present to please turn off mobile phones, tablets or other electronic devices. We have received apologies this morning from Michael McMahon. The first item, and Jamie Hepburn, who is being substituted for today by Dave Thompson. Welcome to the committee, Dave. The first item on our agenda today is to decide whether or not to take items 5 and 6 in private. Are members agreed? Members are agreed. The second item of business today is to take evidence from the Scottish Government Bill team as part of our Stage 1 scrutiny of the landfill tax bill. Can I therefore welcome to the meeting ALISTAIR Brown, David KERROUCHI, John St Clair and Stuart GREIG, and can I invite one of the witnesses to please give a short opening statement.
Thank you, Convener. If I could begin with an opening statement on the taxation elements of the bill, and if it's all right with the committee, I would invite Stuart GREIG to say a few words about the environmental context also. So thank you for the opportunity to come here and to give evidence to the committee on the landfill tax bill. As the committee knows, this is the second of 2 bills establishing devolved taxes in Scotland, following devolution of legislative competence to Scotland in the Scotland Act 2012. The committee is already very familiar with the Land and Buildings Transaction Tax Bill, and your further examination of that bill, obviously at Stage 2, follows this evidence session. And then, of course, again, as the committee is well aware, there's a third bill in preparation for the 2013-14 legislative programme to provide for tax management arrangements, and all subject, of course, to the agreement of the Parliament. But, Convener, with your permission now, I'd like to invite Stuart just to set the environmental policy context for the landfill tax bill.
Indeed.
Well, thank you. Morning. Actually, I'd say it's possibly the economic context for the bill. I think over the last 10 to 12 years, we've seen around about 100 years of commodity price reductions wiped out. That's as we've moved beyond the simple efficiencies that we've managed to create in manufacturing processes, and as the access to raw materials and critical resources has become more costly and expensive. At the same time, we as a nation, we landfill around about 16.5–17 million tonnes of waste each year. Now, we're becoming much better at recycling. But the real opportunity is to make a much deeper shift in our economy around these things. I mean, there's something like £5 billion worth of gold in the waste chain at the moment. There are other critical raw materials. We have vital components in electronics and so forth. And the real shift is getting those things back into supply chains. It's about creating remanufacturing opportunities. It's about reinstilling a manufacturing base potentially. It's about being part of global supply chains which are about reverse logistics for things. It's not just about recycling. So that's a big long-term opportunity for everyone. And really what we're saying is everything around us, everything in this room, everything outside, these are all critical resource assets that we need to become much better at putting back into our economy rather than into low-grade outlets or landfill. So the landfill tax bill, what it does, and landfill tax, which has been in existence in the UK for a number of years now, has really helped in that transition. It's created a price point for landfill which makes other options like recycling or investment in more innovative technologies a real market opportunity. So it creates jobs, it creates a shift in our economy. And that's the context I'd sort of like to set out for this, that although this is a tax and it's about the environment, it's about protecting our environment, reducing carbon, it's also about stimulating a change in economic conditions which will allow some real innovation. And this is one of the steps, but one of probably many more to come in the future.
Thank you, Stuart. Convener, can I just continue for another 2 minutes, if that's acceptable? I thought it might be just helpful for the committee to compare and contrast the landfill tax provisions with those that the committee is more familiar with on land and buildings transaction tax. And there are many similarities. This bill defines the taxable event or the taxable transaction. In this case, it's disposal to landfill. The bill specifies the point in time when the tax becomes due, that is, when the disposal is made. It makes provision for who is liable to pay the tax, which is the landfill site operator, and it sets out how the tax due is to be calculated. And in each case, you find parallel provisions in land and buildings transaction tax. However, the landfill tax is a good deal simpler than LBTT. The transaction itself is a physical transaction rather than a legal or financial one, so it's easier to define and recognise, and it's harder to avoid. There is only one type of transaction in the bill before the committee, one taxable transaction, and we don't have the complication that we have in LBTT, for example, of taxing leases as well as property purchases. In landfill tax, we don't need to differentiate between different bodies making the transactions, while we do in LBTT, for example, we differentiate where a charity is involved in a transaction, or a partnership, or a trust. And in terms of landfill tax, there are not the same complicated reliefs, a schedule of I think 19 reliefs in LBTT, and the same situation doesn't arise in relation to landfill. So these are both important points of similarity and also difference from land and buildings transaction tax. I think just one further thing that I thought the committee might find helpful to have an update on, which is the financial impact of the bill on the Scottish budget. As the SPICE briefing says, the impact on the budget depends on two things: on receipts from the Scottish landfill tax from April 2015 onwards, and the offsetting block grant adjustment. Projections of receipts depend on a number of factors, including the success of the policies that Stuart's referred to divert waste to streams other than landfill. It's also necessary for us to differentiate in the UK tax receipt figures produced by HMRC between Scottish and non-Scottish receipts. We don't have that measured at the moment. We have an estimate of it. And further work is in hand with UK government officials to improve our understanding of both current receipts and forecast receipts from landfill tax in Scotland. And in the meantime, as the committee knows, we have forecasts prepared by the Office of Budget Responsibility, which, again, as the SPICE briefing notes, have been revised downwards in December 2012 and again at the budget in March 2013. And then finally, as regards the block grant adjustment, this is a work in progress, continuing to involve officials and ministers too in Treasury and Scottish Government in discussion. So I hope these remarks are helpful in setting the scene, Convener.
Yes, thank you very much, Alistair, and as always I'll start off with some questions, and I'll try not to steal all the juicy ones right at the start so that colleagues around the table have got a few to follow on with. You said that one of the points of this tax is it's harder to avoid, but South Ayrshire Council, and its evidence said that HMRC cannot collect tax from operators whose sites are not permitted. This loophole encourages large-scale illegal dumping, as the tax avoided and the relatively small fines imposed by the courts make activity financially attractive. And the Law Society is of the view that this means that compliant operators are at a competitive disadvantage. And indeed, SEPA and Revenue Scotland go on to talk about how tackling illegal dumping is important. How would this bill actually impact on that issue?
I'll begin my answer, Convener, to that, and then perhaps ask both Stuart and John St Clair to come in to fill out the answer. But the policy intention in this bill, which differs quite markedly from the policy of the UK landfill tax, which is already in place, obviously, is that illegal disposals to landfill should be subject to tax, and that's provided for in the bill by allowing the tax authority to deem an area which has been used for disposals as an authorised landfill site for tax purposes. So the legislation is drafted with a view to taxing the kind of situation that South Ayrshire Council had in mind, I think, in responding to the committee. But could I just ask Stuart and then John to further fill out that response?
I'll be very brief. I mean, this is a really unique policy that this bill is introducing. This does not exist at a UK level at the moment, and it is intended to be another very strong tool in the armoury of tackling illegal waste dumping. It is it's a criminal offence. It should be a taxable offence, and frankly, the people that are getting away with it at the moment, we need to clamp down on it, and we think this is a critical action to allow us to do that.
So you think the financial penalties that will be imposed through this bill will actually ensure that we eliminate or significantly reduce illegal dumping?
It will be another significant deterrent. So just to put it in context, and then we'll talk about specific cases, but there have been cases in the past where it's this isn't small-scale flag tipping, large-scale organised crime around illegal dumping of materials, which are evading tax of the order of 5 million plus. So these are not small. They're isolated, but they're not small scale at times. So that's what this will allow us to really start to help tackle.
Yes, you're asking the effect on the illegal dumper. Well, he will be subject to a range of sanctions. Currently, he's subject to criminal sanctions. But once we decide to tax it, he will also be liable for tax evasion. And he will be liable to dump properly his waste, so that he will be taxed for the illegal dumping, but there will be another penalty when he has to take it to a proper site. So because there will be effectively two disposals. So we think of this as quite a powerful battery of sanctions against that, and hope that even the message of that going out might help to reduce this type of activity.
Okay, thank you. Now, there's been an issue of waste tourism in relation to illegal dumping has been raised by a number of respondents. Scottish Borders Council, for example, warn that if there's a change in it's a particular material that are exempted, this may lead to an influx from elsewhere in the UK. Funnily enough, North Ayrshire Council in my own area seemed concerned about the issue of waste tourism. Though I think there would have to be a pretty massive differential for people to drive all the way to North Ayrshire to dump any waste. There always seems to be a view in these submissions that somehow in Scotland, you know, the taxes are always going to be higher and there's never going to be an incentive the other way. It always seems to be negative towards Scotland. I'm just wondering, though, what your thinking is in terms of the kind of level of tax that will be set for waste relative to the UK, and if there's any experiences you've been able to draw in terms of cross-border dumping in either Europe or the UK relative to the Republic of Ireland.
Again, Convener, if I can begin an answer to your question and then ask Stuart to come in, particularly on the issue of the understanding that we have of what the differential in tax rates has to be before people begin to incur the cost of moving waste north or south of the border. What Mr Swinney has said in describing his intentions relating to Scottish landfill tax is that he'll set, or he'll ask the Parliament to approve the setting of rates which are no lower than the corresponding UK rates come 2015. And that's, I think, for two reasons. First of all, to minimise cross-border movement, and also to give certainty to companies that are investing in the waste sector, who have prepared their investment plans on the basis of escalating tax rates, both for, well, particularly for active waste. The committee will be aware of the tax escalator which has been in place across the UK since 2011, whereby the tax rate increases annually by £8 a tonne. This is the rate for active waste. It's now at £72 a tonne. It will move on to £80 a tonne with effect from April 2014, and is expected to be at £80 a tonne in 2015. Companies have been making their investment plans on the basis of these taxes, which are, of course, costs on business. So Mr Swinney has said that he would propose rates in Scotland that are no lower than those in place in the UK as a whole in 2015. But work has been done to look at the propensity of operators, quite legitimately, to move waste about if tax rates were lower or higher in the neighbouring jurisdiction. Stuart, is there more you could add?
Yeah, the border with England, in the eyes of waste legislation, isn't a border. So there's no legal issue with waste moving across the country, but we're an island, and it's a really genuine concern. So we've really focused in on this. You'd be surprised at how small the differential in tax rates could be, and it would be cost effective to move waste. You can do backhauling and so forth like that to reduce your fuel costs. So we need to be very aware of that. We have stated that we would initially want to closely mirror the UK structure and the UK rates. I won't get into the detail of exactly what that kind of threshold is to where you might start to see waste move, but it is a lot smaller than you might imagine. So we'd really want to work closely with the UK government on this, probably to try and ensure that if there's any moves afoot or any considerations south of the border and north of the border, that we're talking, we understand the direction of travel for this tax.
Okay. Just to follow on in terms of the issue of certainty, the bill has to be consistent with the 4 principles that have been established of certainty, convenience, efficiency and proportionate to the ability to pay. However, the Scottish Environment Services Association has said in its submission that the Scottish Government appears to have drafted the bill as an enabling framework with specific detail on how the new tax regime might apply in practice to follow later and secondary legislation. As the bill offers the industry little by the way of certainty, then we would have to argue it's not consistency with the principles described above. And of course, the North Ayrshire Council goes on to talk about the uncertainty over the rate of landfill tax will be charged will have an impact on financial planning for the council, because obviously these plans are long term. And it says, although it states that rates will closely align to the UK rates, we still don't know for sure what the rate will be beyond £80 in 2014-15. So when is the Scottish Government likely to look at setting those rates, given the kind of long-term planning that local authorities are currently undertaking?
Well, can I begin the answer to that? And again, I think I'll invite Stuart to come in further on the issue of certainty of which materials are taxed at which rates. In terms of the tax rates themselves, Convener, Mr Swinney has not given any indication that I'm aware of publicly about the timing of the setting of rates for landfill. The committee is aware from its discussion with the Minister on land and buildings transaction tax that he's listening very carefully to representations made to him about the timing of the setting of rates for that tax. And what I would expect is that he'll want to take into account both the written representations that the committee has received and also oral evidence that the committee receives in considering that issue that you raise. It's worth pointing out that the issue that arises in relation to the property markets of setting rates very early or very late don't seem to me to be quite so applicable in terms of landfill tax. People are not going to stockpile waste waiting for a reduction in tax rates or whatever. I think that would be very unlikely. But that's an issue that the committee may want to return to when it takes evidence from the Minister himself in 2 weeks' time. Convener, just going on to what I think was probably the first part of your question, and certainly the burden of the point made by SESA and the Council, which is certainty about the range of materials covered by the tax and whether the lower rate of tax or the higher rate. I invite Stuart to offer the committee a response on that.
Yeah, we are quite well aware of, it's not just the rates, across the board, the administrative system, the qualifying materials, all of these things, it's so vital that the industry have as much certainty as we can provide. I think it is appropriate to reserve a number of important points here, policy matters, to subordinate legislation. It will allow the Parliament to adjust critical points of this tax to bring it in line with shifts in policy and shifts with external circumstances, which is essential. We have asked CISA, and they are working on a piece of on something for us at the moment to identify all those points which are the things that they need most certainty around. And some will be things that can be covered in guidance, some will be things which will be in the subordinate legislation, but it gives us a hit list of things that we need to work closely with them on to give them as much certainty as we can, as soon as we can. So that's been our approach to this, and we'll continue to pursue that over the sort of coming months as the bill's moving through Parliament.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the adjustment to block grant, Alistair, and I know discussions are ongoing in that. What SEPA have said is that we trust that any adjustment will allow for the proposed Revenue Scotland registrars of Scotland SEPA set up and running costs. Do we know if that will in fact be the case? Because I understand that the costs in a financial memorandum from April 2015 are estimated at £2.2 million. Although I'm pleased to see that the 26 full-time equivalent staff will be employed here in Scotland rather than being paid to be employed south of the border. To HMRC.
Well, Convener, in relation to SEPA's comment, I have a great deal of sympathy with it, but the policy of the UK government is that the costs of administering devolved taxes and devolved anything else should fall on the Scottish Government's budget. So my expectation, it's more than an expectation, it's an explicit policy of the UK Government, and so the block grant adjustment would not include an allowance for the costs of administering landfill tax or land and buildings transaction tax, for that matter, in Scotland. And that is it's similar to the situation that we have in relation to the Scottish rate of income tax, where the Scottish Government is being invoiced for the costs of establishing that tax, and then from 2016 onwards we expect to have to pay the cost of running it.
Yeah, I think it's important. I know you've said this on a number of occasions, Finance-Committe, but I think it's important to get that kind of thing on the record. Just one last question before I allow colleagues to come in. South Ayrshire Council have said that inert materials could perhaps be better used in the production of aggregates, building blocks, filtration equipment or landscaping than going to landfill disposal. And 2 responses suggested that asbestos should be moved onto this list, including Viridor, who state that a lower tax on asbestos may encourage less environmental crime resulting from the illegal disposal of this form of waste, and this would balance the increased costs of treating this form of waste and combined would encourage more responsible disposal of asbestos in Scotland. Just wonder if you can comment on that.
I would invite Stuart GREIG to respond to that, convener.
I think some of these are quite good and valid points actually that have been raised. We just need to be very careful that we work through all the potential ramifications. So if you reduce a rate for asbestos, will we see a lot more of that type of material moved to Scotland from England, for instance? So we need to understand what the full implications of those things are. And on the, driving more recycling, that's exactly what the purpose of the tax is. And I think, I'm sure ministers would be open to looking at those sorts of options as the tax is implemented. We probably wouldn't want to have too many radical changes at the point of implementation, but as you move forward from that post-2015, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons we created a slightly more flexible system in the legislation to allow ministers and the Parliament that adaptability to bring things into the tax or adjust things in a slightly simpler manner.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open up questions to committee. First person to ask questions will be Malcolm, to be followed by Dave.
When you were going through the differences between this and LBTT, I suppose one that struck me when I was thinking about this beforehand was, the clear commitment of the government on LBTT to achieve revenue neutrality, which presumably is not relevant here because it's one of these strange taxes where you actually want the yield to be as low as possible, which seems to me to create some problems when it comes to the block grant adjustment. So I just wondered what the Scottish Government's thinking on this is. I mean, the estimates that we have are that it will generate 107 million in 2015-16, although you emphasise that's only an estimate, and falling to 40.5 million in 2025. So I just wondered what the attitude of the Scottish Government would be to the block grant adjustment if those figures are the guiding figures that we've got.
I think there are two points to make in response to that, to Mr Chisholm's question, convener. I think the first is that we absolutely recognise the point that Mr Chisholm makes, that normally tax revenues are broadly pegged to economic activity, and as the economy grows or stagnates or whatever, tax revenues behave similarly. But this, an environmental tax where success in terms of the policy intention is really measured by a reduction in revenues, is quite unlike, as far as I can think anyway, it's quite unlike any other tax which we have to deal with. Now, if you're the UK government looking at a very broad basket of 30-odd taxes, a reduction in income stream from one of these is an issue to be balanced up with many others. Because this is one of 2 devolved taxes, or one of 3 if you include the Scottish rate of income tax, then it's a particular concern for the Scottish Government. And how to deal with that forecast reduction in the context of agreeing a block grant adjustment method with the UK Government and with Treasury in particular is a significant issue, and is part of what we've been discussing at official level, and part of what's in Mr Swinney's mind too, in terms of his position on all of this. So it's a real issue, and we don't yet have an answer to it. But I think I can safely say Mr. Swinney expects us to find an answer that he can bring back to the Parliament in due course. The second point is about how good we are at forecasting these things. It's a slightly less, it's a slightly more academic point, I suppose. And at the moment, as the committee is aware from the SPICE briefing, there is a series or a set of tax receipt projections from OBR, most recently published at the budget in March 2013. Broadly speaking, the OBR sees tax revenue from landfill tax staying level in cash terms from 2015 onwards. But our own projections are, as you've just quoted, are for a significant reduction by over 60% by 2025. So there is further work to be doing, and we're engaged in conversation with officials south of the border on exploring further the best way to project, to forecast tax receipts.
I mean, is the expectation that this will be a one-off block grant adjustment like for LBTT? But because, well, I mean, obviously the Scottish Government will argue for as high a level as possible, and I suppose you would start by arguing for the 107 million, presumably. But I suppose in principle there's almost an argument for having this a running adjustment that varies with, you know, with the overall UK rate over a period of years, because but presumably otherwise you will just have to try and argue for the 107 million, but there will obviously be a strong counter argument to that in terms of the projections.
Well, that's very much the substance of the discussions that are being had at the moment with Treasury. The UK government's policy in all of this is set out, was set out originally in the command paper of November 2010, which puts together the two devolved taxes, what we now call Land and Buildings Transaction Tax and Scottish Landfill Tax. So the UK government hasn't differentiated between them in discussing block grant adjustment.
Sorry. Malcolm said that they wanted to keep that level up as high as possible. Is it not as low as possible?
Yes. In our discussions with Treasury, we want to achieve a block grant adjustment that is as low as possible, so that we minimise the risk of the Scottish budget losing when the devolved taxes start up in April 2015.
Thank to the convener. I mean, I was thinking of gaining 107. Obviously, you'd lose 107. So, as ever, the convener is right. I think I'll bow to that point.
Okay, Dave, to follow by Jean.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, gentlemen. As Director of Protective Services for Highland Council many years ago, one of my responsibilities was waste disposal, and there was a situation arose, and I just wonder if this is considered in any way in the bill here, where someone is developing a piece of land and there's perfectly good topsoil, general spoil, etc., which isn't contaminated in any way. We found that it would be very useful for us to allow that material into the site to help us create bunds and so on, you know, so that we could line, because we were prevented from the dilute and dispersal method that we'd used successfully for a long, long time. But the way the current legislation was structured meant that we couldn't do that, and in fact, you know, we didn't get a lot of material, and even trying to arrange to purchase, because the intention of the developer was to dispose of the material as a byproduct from developing the land for housing, it couldn't be sold. I can't quite remember the detail of it, but you know, I think we need to make sure that there's a mechanism where a developer is willing to give at a very low cost, because otherwise they're going to have to pay landfill tax to dispose of that, or they're going to keep it on site and create artificial, you know, sort of bunds and things round a housing estate, which might not be desirable. Have you given any thought to trying to help developers and landfill operators to have a mutually beneficial sort of way of dealing with material like that?
So I'm not sure how long ago it was that you were looking after those areas.
15 to 20 years ago.
I think the legislation around this will have changed probably quite substantially since then. So there's a number of exemptions at work at the moment that allow developers to move material around and use material in certain ways on site. You have entered into quite a controversial area, actually, because this is one of those areas where people can hide some of the more illegal aspects of waste activity. This is one of those classic areas where, it might be sold that this is good quality soil and stuff, but under the top layer of it there's a whole host of sins and things. So it's just striking the balance between allowing that flexibility to get good use of the topsoil and everything else, but not create an open avenue for people to abuse that system to kind of dispose of things they shouldn't in those areas and avoid landfill tax. But I think the system has changed. If you'd like more information on it, it's not a problem. We can give you an update on that.
I just really want to tease out whether you're obviously thinking of these things, and anything that could be mutually beneficial. I understand the points about people maybe abusing or misusing the situation, and apologies for my out-of-date information. Can I move on to a second point then, and that's to do with the Landfill Communities Fund. Just really a bit of information from you, if you like, in terms of where that can be distributed. Because if, in the past, if a local authority had a landfill site within its boundaries, then that fund that was built up could be distributed to local communities. Now, maybe that's changed as well since I was working in this area. But as landfill reduces, fewer and fewer areas are going to have landfill sites in their immediate vicinity. Does that mean that only communities close to landfill sites, and what is the definition of close, will benefit from this? Or is there a plan to broaden this out to create a Scotland-wide fund that communities could bid into?
Dave, would you be able to provide a response to Mr Thompson?
We're currently listening to the Landfill Community Fund Forum and sort of environmental bodies about how we do that. There's a number of, for example, environment groups who, in the guidance, there's the 10-mile radius rule in the guidance, and there's the objective sort of environmental improvement, and that doesn't always happen within 10 miles of a landfill site. So I think further down the road, we'll come to the guidelines and subordinate legislation. We'll be sort of listening to the community groups and environmental groups about how best we can sort of apply those, as you say, depreciating sort of returns on the fund.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be unfortunate that areas that get rid of their landfill sites don't benefit, and those that keep their landfill sites do. I think there's a case for ensuring that the whole of Scotland can access these funds and not just the ones close. Okay, maybe you could have a two-tier system that those close get an additional benefit, but it might be useful to have a fund that was tiered in such a way that other communities, would also benefit from it.
It may also be worth saying, in addition to what Dave KERROUCHI has said in response to Mr Thompson's question, Convener, that there is a regulation-making power in the bill, in section 18, which means that regulations dealing with what are called tax credits, because the community landfill fund that Mr Thompson refers to is funded by payments from landfill operators who then achieve a credit on the tax due. But these regulations are not bound in the bill to uses, to environmental purposes within a radius, for example, of landfill site. So the regulations can make broader provision than that. And as Dave KERROUCHI has indicated, the Scottish Government would be consulting closely with those affected in making these regulations, including the environmental bodies that are pretty effective in putting their points across. Stuart, is that a fair representation?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and it's Jean to be followed by Gavin.
Thank you, Convener. I wanted just to refer to the submission from Corral Yellen Shear, or Western Isles Council, but about the it's really, I guess, about the cost of transporting, and relevant to any island, of course, or island group, of recycling. So while we encourage them to recycle as much as possible, and we have a policy of zero waste, I guess, clearly it's not to their advantage given the cost of bringing recycling stuff back. And I know that, Stuart, Greg, you mentioned reverse logistics and a programme of doing that. I presume that's... is that going to be something that's running concurrently with as we look at land waste, of how we're doing it? I mean, there are examples of community groups, say in Shetland, who don't transport empty glass, for example, back. They're using it, but they are having to apply to different funding organisations to keep that going. It may have a shelf life, you know, but they are using all of their glass for road repairs and making tiles and bricks and all kinds of things. So they've generated... that's the kind of exercise that you think might be practical?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are lots of really good examples of how the island communities and more remote areas kind of rise to the challenge of trying to close the loop on these materials. And they do have a different set of circumstances. Some actually are a bit similar to the circumstance of Scotland, sitting off the coast of mainland Europe as well, actually. But yeah, this idea of reverse logistics, yeah, you can certainly some councils are backhauling materials with other loads on the ships back to shore. There's some interesting work on community anaerobic digestion for food waste and other things. So yeah, I mean, we are really appreciative of kind of the unique challenges that you have in island areas. Some of our other policies have provided very much greater flexibility for the island communities to adapt and so forth. I think landfill tax, it would be a challenging one to do something very specific with this tax. It's probably more around all the other support mechanisms we have in Zero Waste Scotland and elsewhere to help give those communities access to that funding support and technical support to get those nice creative things in place.
Thank you. And just as a supplementary to questions the convener asked, you were talking about the illegal dumping and the kind of penalties that would be applied. That I think you said that illegal dumping, well, apart from the criminal offence, Criminal Act, and tax avoidance, we kind of throw the book at them. But how will we know who they are? I mean, that sounds practical solution, or you know, they should rightly be charged. But I mean, how easy is it now? Are we successful in bringing criminal proceedings to people who do illegal dumping currently? And how do we get the tax? How do we resolve that situation?
We are quite successful. SEPA have a number of initiatives, and it's in environmental crime task force work, and there's been a number of recent quite high profile prosecutions for some quite large scale activities. So I think this just gives us another tool to use in that context, and you know, we will be looking to SEPA to continue its efforts on that front, and the ability to use the information from its environmental enforcement work to inform it, possibly the tax administration side of things as well, is a real strength that having SEPA playing that joint role there will bring to this. So I say, look, yeah, there's more to be done. This is another thing to add that will help, and absolutely we'll be looking to SEPA and others once this tax is in place to really focus in on this issue with this new tool at their disposal.
It might be worth just mentioning that where there is illegal dumping, there can be two parties involved. One, the illegal dumper, if it's a fly-by-night on somebody else's land, but the landlord can also, landowner can also be complicit. That's why we've got a provision in section 16(3) that where there is unauthorised dumping, it's not only the person who made the disposal that is liable, but anybody who knowingly was in on it. So that would catch cases where the landlord must have known that this truck was going along and dumping the stuff. Okay, Gavin, to be followed by John.
Thanks, Convener. The Chartered Institute of Taxation, in their written evidence, put forward a view that the current rate structure doesn't really fit with the objectives of the tax. I just wonder if the Scottish Government at this stage has any views on what the rate structure ought to look like. Obviously, we have two rates as it is. Is this an opportunity to change that rate structure to reflect what we're trying to achieve? And in particular, are there potential changes to the definition of inert waste to reflect that some waste may be inert, but it could be more easily recycled than perhaps other items of inert waste? I just wonder if you want to expand on what the government's thinking is at the moment.
Stuart, shall I just start with a brief response to Mr. Brown and invite you to come in? I think in terms of structure, we've obviously read carefully the Chartered Institute's response, and there are other arguments also for increasing the number of tax rate bands. At the moment, there are two. There's inert material, smashed up masonry and aggregate and whatnot, which is inert, a very low tax rate, £2.50 a tonne. And then there's the active waste, which basically the stuff generated from our households and collected by local authorities, currently £72 a tonne. And there are arguments for a rate in the middle, let's say, for material that's less environmentally harmful than others, but isn't completely inert. And I think that one point to make about all of that is that the more rates you have, the more complicated the tax is to administer, not only for the tax authority and for SEPA, but also for the waste contractors and local authorities that have to stream waste and separate it out into its different taxable components. But that's speaking as a bit of a tax man. I'd like Stuart to give a view from his perspective.
To be honest, I don't have too much more to add. I mean, I think, like anything, that you could make this far more sophisticated than it is at the moment and add extra rates and so forth. But every time you do that, you introduce another potential loophole, you introduce another complexity to administering the tax. But that's not to say that these things are off the table in any sense. The critical thing is, if we are at some stage going to look at introducing something new, it'd be to make sure that industry has, the appropriate lead-in time, they understand it's coming, people can change their investment plans appropriately. We just need to understand what the full implications of introducing, for instance, a new rate would mean.
That's helpful, thank you. Next question then, you've had a couple of questions already about illegal operators, and I think most people certainly would welcome the provisions allowing SEPA and others to clamp down on them. Question though that has come through, I think some of the written submissions, is will there be additional resources for SEPA and other organisations to actually enforce the new powers that they have, or is the government view that actually they don't need additional resources in order to implement these powers that they're going to get?
Again, can I begin and invite you, Stuart, to come in? The government has, as the committee knows, provided estimates in the financial memorandum for the costs of administering landfill tax and land and buildings transaction tax. And again, as the committee knows, that breaks into several components. At the level of Revenue Scotland, we've not been able to separate the costs as between administering land and buildings transaction tax and landfill tax at this stage. A time will come when, as the design of Revenue Scotland and its staffing structure becomes clearer, I think it will be possible for Revenue Scotland to make an estimate of its expenses, estimated costs of running the two taxes. And then we also have, we've provided in the financial memorandum an estimate of SEPA's costs in setting up systems, recruiting and training staff and so on, and then in running landfill tax. Now, an element has been included in the Revenue Scotland costs for compliance, and we haven't differentiated between compliance for landfill and compliance for LBTT. And our present expectation is that these costs would be sufficient to cover the full range of compliance activity, and we would expect to be scrutinised on actual costs post-2015 compared to our forecasts. However, having said that, clearly, if in the situation of operating the tasks, SEPA have a particular proposition to make about the way that compliance operates or whatever, then I'm sure that's something that the Scottish Government would listen to. But our present forecasts include compliance costs. But just invite Stuart to add anything that he wants to on the way SEPA operates.
To a very, very minor point that, I mean, we are working with SEPA on this at the moment, and SEPA are already looking at the opportunities that they can seize off the back of taking responsibility here. So, as I say, they're looking at some of the environmental crime task force work. They're also looking at the regulatory reform bill, and I think, you know, as we move towards 2015 and in the years subsequent to that, yeah, I think it's undoubted that you'll see a push by SEPA on this front.
The next question was going to be how much of Revenue Scotland's cost can be attributed to landfill tax, but Mr Brown has preempted that one. Last question then, just you've had a couple of questions about the Landfill Communities Fund already, particularly about the 10-mile radius question. Just so in terms of any regulations you might bring forward, though, does the government have a view at the moment or an estimate of what the cost of the Landfill Communities Fund would be? We have sort of estimates of how much we think the tax will collect. Presumably some would then be taken off that to fund the Landfill Communities Fund. Is there a sort of estimate of what that is likely to be, albeit it wouldn't be accurate obviously at this stage, but do you have a best estimate?
If I can just begin an answer to that and ask Dave to come in on the back of it. At the moment, because we're starting from a situation where there is already at a UK level a landfill communities fund, the amount of tax credit that operators are able to get back from contributions to the Community Landfill Fund is, by my recollection, 5.6% of their contribution. So for every 100 million, is the current rate 6.8. Pardon me, 6.8%. Thank you. So for every 100 million of tax due, the taxpayers, the landfill operators, are able to earn credit of 6.8 million by making contributions to the Community Landfill Fund. We haven't specified as in the face of the bill the parameters for the Community Landfill Fund going forward. But Dave, is there more information that you can provide for the committee?
Nothing much more to add, just that currently the credit scheme it's got a high take-up rate, and it's quite successful. So of the the tax due to government, that the would imagine that it would be close, if it's at 6.8%, that come implementation that 90% of that will be sort of diverted away from sort of the coffers to environmental bodies. Yeah.
And just to give you the feel for it, I mean, I think it's on 2011, the most recent figures, it's about £4.5 million has been distributed through the Landfill Communities Fund. That is going to diminish, and that's why the Minister said he'd increase it by around 10%. But yeah, it's an absolutely valid point. How do we make best use of what is a diminishing pot of money, but what has been a really valuable pot of money to organisations like RSPB in funding its work and in helping mitigate the impacts of landfill sites? That's a real challenge for us in the years ahead.
Thank you.
Deputy Convener. Thanks, Convener. Yeah, well, touching on probably some of the issues that have already been touched on. I mean, we've mentioned waste tourism, and we're thinking especially of England, but the point was made that it can actually be worthwhile to take things a long way away sometimes. And I know there's been stories of Western companies going to Africa and dumping stuff. How do we prevent that happening in the whole scheme of things?
That rather goes beyond my knowledge in terms of the landfill tax, so I would ask Stuart to
Yeah, I mean, there are European-wide legislation on this, and there are international agreements on this as well. So, I mean, there's certain, if it's waste in a very traditional sense, like the stuff you find in your black bin, you're not allowed to export that. There's a transfrontier shipment regime. So, waste doesn't get exported other than in some very illegal circumstances. But there are a number of other sort of materials now, some of which really aren't waste. It's all the recyclate that you have in your recycling bins. Some of that goes to China, Indonesia and other places, and some of it stays here and is turned back into plastics for use in food grade containers and so forth. And then there's a kind of a grey area in the middle, which is the thing that CEPA are very focused on at the moment, which is clamping down on where the transfrontier shipment, the movement of waste is being abused.
So we don't need to worry too much that if our rate goes higher, that would kind of push waste overseas or anything like that? It shouldn't be a factor? When I say rate, I mean the tax rate.
Yeah. I mean, it's a genuine concern. Whatever you do to try and ensure you drive things out of the bin and into other avenues, there are always people there that will try and see that as an opportunity to circumvent the system and make some money out of it. So whatever you do on this tax, ensuring that the legislation and the enforcement around the legal side of this is as tight as possible is essential. And I think we have a good regime in place, and we just add to it with what we can through this bill as well.
Okay, thanks. I mean, on the question of the rates, I think it's CISA, is that right, SESA, were critical of the fact that we're talking about following closely, I think is the wording, UK rates, and they feel that's rather ambiguous and doesn't provide the certainty and clarity that they would like. I mean, it seems to me they want 100% clarity and 100% certainty. I mean, how do we get the balance in there between the amount of certainty and uncertainty?
As we said earlier, in response to another question, what Mr Swinney has said, it's not in the bill, it's not in legislation, but what Mr Swinney has said is that he intends to invite Parliament to agree rates for Scottish landfill tax that are no lower than the rates applying in the rest of the UK from 2015 onwards. So in that respect, I think the Minister was concerned to provide as much certainty as possible to the industry. What he's not doing, what the Minister is not doing, is fettering his discretion to propose higher rates than might apply in the UK in future. But
so that really the industry doesn't need any more certainty other than a kind of floor. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the industry may feel that it needs, or it would like to have certainty about the ceiling as well as the floor. But at this stage, what we're offering is certainty on the floor, which is important, we believe, particularly important in relation to investment plans that companies active in this sector have made, which depend on the cost of landfilling being...
Am I right in saying it's the minimum cost that matters, because that then makes it worthwhile to invest, and if it was a higher rate of tax, that would be even more of a bonus in a sense?
Stuart.
Doesn't work that way.
So waste management companies now are quite diverse organisations. They may deal with your black bag residual waste, they'll deal with recycling, they might deal with electronics and stuff as well. So, if you change one thing, it disincentivises one of the areas of what they're involved in, but creates an opportunity in one of the other areas. So the floor and ceiling will be irrelevant to them. But the really important point here is that they have no certainty over what the UK government's position will be on landfill tax post next year. So they're basically in the same situation in Scotland as they are with the rest of the UK. So the only point I would make with the waste management companies, they make a really great contribution to our economy. They're absolutely vital in the shift to handling waste as a resource. But their current business model is handling waste and volumes of waste. And if you make money off waste and you make money off the volume of material, you're going to want certainty about how much of that might be around in the future. So we can't give that 100% certainty. We're always trying to drive down the amount of this stuff that flows through our economy. And landfill tax will always be used in the future to try and drive down the amount of waste we have in our economy. So what we said is as much certainty as we can provide, something very similar to UK at the first instance, but we continue to be open to ideas about where it would go in the future.
Okay, thanks. I mean, the Chartered Institute of Taxation say in paragraph 18 of their part, the resource that is being protected is land. Well, in the first place, I wasn't sure I agreed with that. I thought we were trying to, especially what Mr Gregg said earlier on, was about more protecting resources in the wider remit. So I wonder if you agree with that it is land. And they then build on that by saying it shouldn't be weight that the taxes are based on. it should be some other fairer measure, but I don't think they actually suggest what that might be. What's your response to that?
I think if Mr Mason's content, I would invite Stuart to comment on, certainly on the resource being protected as land comment, because I would certainly think that there are other resources being protected through landfill tax. Stuart, is that something you would comment on?
I can try. I think I might be as confused as yourself on this point. Yeah, I mean, there's 78 landfill sites at the moment. I don't think I mean, I'm struggling to understand how we're protecting something as land here.
You're wanting recycling and the stuff going in.
Yeah, I mean, the focus is on getting the stuff out of these sites. Actually, the big opportunity is if you have a look at where landfills are moving in the future, right? We've got 78 today, we'll have significantly less at some point in the future. Some of these are opportunities for redevelopment. So, I mean, there are good examples. The Scottish Government's building is on a landfill site. So the future might be that the opportunity is once we move away from these being landfill sites, they become redevelopment opportunities and so forth. I can see the value of the land in that sense.
I mean, it just struck me as a strange logic when I read it. I just wanted kind of a bit of reassurance that I wasn't misunderstanding it myself, because by their logic, if you dug a deep enough hole, it wouldn't use up very much land, so you could just put any amount of stuff in. Whereas what you said at the beginning was we are actually trying to save resources in the wider scale.
If I can just come in on the back of what Mr Mason has said, the Chartered Institute have been very helpful to us, as the committee will know, in relation to our work on devolved taxes, particularly land and buildings transaction tax. And I think one thing that we can do is just make sure through contact, the existing contact that we have with the Chartered Institute, that we fully understand the point they've made here. So there's an opportunity for us to have a conversation with them about the point you've raised.
Okay, thanks. In Coslow's submission, I mean, they talk kind of quite generally about the new taxes and the importance of a local dimension to that, which I must say I'm sympathetic to. But am I right in saying that you wouldn't even consider this tax being a local tax, but it does need to be a national tax?
Well, if I can offer a response to that, and again invite Stuart to come in if he wishes. I think what we see in terms of landfill operations is certainly a Scotland-wide network of landfill sites and waste companies who operate them. Local authorities, for example, will dispose of their waste to landfill in local authority areas other than their own. There's a lot of cross-local authority operation in that respect. I would have thought too that were this tax to be devolved to local level, there would be considerable difficulty in created if tax rates were set at different levels in different local authority areas. And I think the third point to make would be that there is a very coherent Scottish level policy on waste disposal, diverting waste from landfill, which I think would be supported by a Scottish-wide approach to the landfill tax. Stuart, would you want to add to that?
Fine, okay. Yeah. I mean, in a sense, following on from that, Glasgow City Council make the point that if there's two different regimes, tax regimes, that could add bureaucracy to the companies who operate in the UK. I mean, are we talking here companies that only operate in the UK, so they would be moving from one tax regime to two, or are we talking companies that operate internationally, which would be moving from 20 tax regimes to 21?
We've certainly recognised that a number of companies in the waste management sector are cross-UK, and we fully recognise that they will move from having to deal with one UK-level landfill tax regime to two, one for Scotland, one for the rest of the UK. Stuart could maybe provide any further information about the degree to which these companies operate internationally, but I think the point we make in the financial memorandum is that the increased burden on companies moving from operating within one tax regime to operating within two would, we believe, be relatively small. Stuart, anything on the international dimension?
Yeah, there probably are a couple of companies that have an international dimension and still operate landfill sites. So you're absolutely right. It might just be adding to one extra tax to 25 they may be dealing with. We are doing everything we can as well to simplify the system for Scotland. So we will be looking to introduce with Super and Revenue Scotland an electronic return system. So it's trying to minimise the burden of administration on operators in Scotland, and by doing that, try and make it as easy as possible to adapt to having two systems. That's the principle.
Okay, thanks. On the Landfill Communities Fund, I mean, this 10-mile measure has been mentioned. Now, for Mr Thompson there, 10 miles is quite a short distance in his constituency. In my constituency, 10 miles is absolutely mega huge. You know, it's far, far too big. And I was wondering, is there any consideration given to, you know, some way of adapting this? I mean, I began to think, could you do it that it would be the local ward that the landfill site was in, and perhaps the adjoining wards, which would therefore in an urban area be more compact, and the rural area would be much wider. I mean, has there been any thought of anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would genuinely say that the 10-mile radius rule is probably something that we will need to really look at hard. There are other ways to do this other than a 10-mile rule. There's also the issue of the material that gets to a landfill site is travelling across our roads, and that causes disruptions to people and communities, not just in the close vicinity to the landfill site. So there are good reasons for it to be smaller in some circumstances and closer to the landfill site, and there are other justifications to broaden it out across transport networks, and there's a good justification to cover things outside of that urban area if you want to look at the environmental damage of landfill sites and counter that. So maybe we do need something a little more sophisticated in the future, and that's why we think guidance is the way to deal with this. If we set something up, we'll do it in guidance. It can be a bit more flexible. It can be a bit more accommodating to these more complex circumstances that we're all talking about here. So I think undoubtedly that'll be what we'll be looking at over the next 18 months before it's implemented with everyone that's involved in the fund at the moment.
I think in Glasgow's submission, and I think Glasgow dumps quite a lot of its rubbish in South Lanarkshire, from what I understand, but they're arguing that, of course, a lot of the benefit should come back to Glasgow rather than staying in South Lanarkshire, where presumably the people suffer for it. So is that something that's still to be developed, or is there any thinking on that?
Well, I think we want to make sure the people that are affected by landfill sites are the first port of call for getting compensation for that damage, and that's going to either be people right at the landfill site or people that are affected by the transportation of the waste to those landfill sites. I think that's number one priority, and then it's to look at those other environmental implications of landfill, so that money can maybe flow into things outside of the very closely affected communities. So I think you might have a point that Glasgow have a justification if some of their citizens are affected by that transportation, the movement down the street to the landfill site in South Lanarkshire.
And I mean, the other question in there is, how specific should the fund be for really either an environmental project or preventing future waste? Because that is one of the suggestions that come through. Whereas my understanding, I mean, a couple of things I can think of in my constituency, because we have Parsons in our constituency, so we've had some of this. I mean, one was building a tennis court, which is good, I mean, I'm for tennis courts, but the link to waste is a bit limited. Another one was a church kitchen, and I'm also a fan of church kitchens, but again, the link to waste was kind of limited. Are we needing to make it more restricted to waste reduction and things?
There is a potential for that. The fund, when it was first initiated, it did cover a much broader range of things, and I think money was diverted into research into how to recycle more and so forth. The challenge is that there are a number of vested interests in the fund around that area. So waste management companies, they will actually operate a number of the charities that distribute the fund. Now they will have their own vested interest in trying to up recycling rates and so forth. So that's what the regulator and trust keeps an eye on. So yeah, I think there is an opportunity to try and make sure it's focused in on those things that are going to make the biggest difference, whether it's locally or whether it's to the policy landscape. But it has to be done in a way where it's it's not interfering with the sort of the free market and the competition element here between the waste management companies.
Thanks. And my final question, RSPB said the current administration of the tax, I think they mean for the fund, of the tax is ungainly and costly, brackets, it costs 2% of the value of the community's fund to administer. I actually thought 2% was quite good. and you know, a lot of charities would spend a lot more than that in their administration. So, have you any comment on that point?
Yeah, I think the critical thing here is that the money is going to be going down. So we've got to get an administration system in place that is as cost effective as possible, so as much of that money gets into worthy causes as possible. And we're looking at what the options might be around that. And you know, the distributive bodies at the moment have a strong view on what it might look like, and there's a couple of models on the table. That's the sort of thing that we'll be looking at taking forward in the subordinate legislation. The range of options are broadly self-regulated, so you take out a tier of administration in it, or you simplify the number of bodies that are involved in it. So there's maybe one overarching body that helps administer the funds. But whatever we do, we want to make sure that it never touches the hands of government, so it can be used for match funding purposes and everything else. So I have to say, there isn't a very simple solution to all the points that have been raised here. We've definitely got some thinking to do. We've got a few more discussions to have with all the people involved in the fund at the moment. But I've no doubt, you know, 6 months, 12 months' time, we'll have a good idea on the table on this.
Much.
Dave, supplementary.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know it's maybe not directly in relation to the remit of this bill, but I'd just like your view on whether, in relation to this fund, it would be, and it's going down as you're saying, it might be useful if the fund could be bolstered and boosted by some kind of incentive for people who create recycling facilities and other positive waste disposal facilities. Just really your view on that as an idea, because if we're trying to encourage less landfill and more recycling and so on, it would be logical, I would have thought, not just to, you know, reward communities for the damage of a landfill site, put it that way, but also to reward those who are creating positive recycling facilities and so on, and that would help to keep that fund going forward and broaden it out around the country as well. Do you have any view on that as just a general idea?
You know, personally, I like it. I think that there has been some suggestions around that area in the past, and the challenge you have is that is making sure it wouldn't give a particular waste management company any particular competitive advantage in that area, because they'll be handling those recyclable materials. That's their business. So it's finding a way to do that without disrupting sort of the competitive market here.
If I can add to that too, Stuart, there are obviously wider issues of government revenues and what can be afforded, and also the fact that some government expenditure goes into encouraging positive environmental practice, which you would have to take into account. But certainly, just to clarify Stuart's point that revenues available to the community landfill fund will be declining, that your comment, Stuart, I'm sure was based on the forecast, which is in the financial memorandum, that we expect receipts to decline by around 60% between 2015 and 2025. So that the background is a projection of declining revenues from landfill tax, and therefore, because the community landfill fund is geared to landfill tax receipts, it's a credit up to a fixed cap, that the income to the landfill fund, the community landfill fund, would, we expect, be declining over that period from 2015 onwards, from about 7 million approximately a year.
Okay, thank you. That's concluded questions from the committee, but I've got just a few to finish on now. We've talked a lot about Landfill Communities Fund. A number of members, I don't really want to dwell on it, given it's a fairly small proportion of the bill, but I just want to add my own comments. The CISA, for example, have said, and I quote, that this relatively small fund would be diluted by extending its remit, leaving less available to those communities experiencing the most direct disbenefit, and I would actually agree with that. And just to see what your comments are on that. The other thing as well is that I represent an area with a number of landfill sites, particularly, for example, in the Garnock Valley, and some of these fairly disadvantaged areas find it difficult to actually apply for resources in this fund. You know, and I just think that there has to be work done to try and make it easier for people to actually apply. And make it less costly for people to actually apply to that fund, so that the areas that are most that are most affected by this actually are the ones who actually benefit from this. I certainly don't believe it should be extended, or a declining fund should be extended to the rest of Scotland. I don't see what the benefit that would be. don't know if you have any comments on those points.
Convener, I think one point to make on the whole issue of Community Landfill Fund, which comes out of Stuart's earlier observations, is that the Scottish Government will be working with the industry and with community groups and people with an environmental interest to develop proposals that would then be reflected in subordinate legislation that would come to the Parliament for approval. And I would certainly expect, not speaking here with any knowledge of the environmental policy scene, but I would expect many of these issues will be thrashed out in the process of discussing proposals with interested groups. And I also expect that we'll find that there are different views, very sincerely held, which will be difficult to reconcile. There will be people who believe, for good reason, that the fund should be available to support environmental good causes anywhere in Scotland, and others who believe that the fund should be directed towards good causes which are geographically very close to landfill sites. And we'll need to do our best to draw out some kind of synthesis of all of that to reflect that either in the statutory instruments, the subordinate legislation for parliamentary approval, and in the guidance which will help whoever ends up administering the fund for Scotland to reflect the policy intention that's finally decided on. So there's a lot of discussion still to be had and a lot of opinion to be brought in, I think, from relevant groups. And we're seeing some of that opinion, as you and others have pointed out, we're seeing some of that opinion being expressed, I think, quite coherently in the responses to the committee's request for written evidence. So it's a discussion that has started and will continue. Stuart, is that a fair representation?
Yeah.
Okay. Just to move on to a couple of other areas and before we wind up, will it be SEPA or Revenue Scotland who will be responsible for enforcement of the tax?
Convener, I think that's an issue which is still for discussion. Very broadly, it's an observation rather than an answer to your question, but very broadly, we've put the costs of enforcement or compliance into the Revenue Scotland box for the purposes of the financial memorandum. But we also registered the point that the division between Revenue Scotland responsibilities and either SEPA or Registers of Scotland in relation to land and buildings transaction tax, but the division between these two sets of responsibilities is not cast in stone. It's not legislated for, although we would expect to address these issues in the tax management bill when we bring that forward towards the end of this year. And my expectation is that the precise division of responsibilities will be worked out between the two organisations, that they are already working together now that we have Revenue Scotland staffed up in its pre-statutory phase. So the head of Revenue Scotland, Eleanor Emberson, and her staff, including the Chief Operating Officer, Nicky Harrison, are discussing, are beginning to discuss these issues with SEPA. And I think we'll see that issue developing, moving forward over the next year or so. So that the division of responsibilities is well understood and provided for in good time before April 2015.
Okay, thank you. And Stuart mentioned the fact there are 78 landfill sites, legal landfill sites in Scotland. I'm just wondering if you have any ideas the scale of illegal sites. You might think, well, it's illegal, so we don't really know. But I mean, I don't think this is quite like the number of illegal immigrants, where all these estimates made when they're illegal, and obviously no one can know for sure. But with illegal sites, they're actually geographically there, and they can be identified to an extent. I'm just wondering what the kind of scale of this is, and how much will be brought into the tax regime if, in actual fact, the kind of changes that you propose to introduce will be made. What will be the benefit financially, even just in broad estimate terms?
Convener, I'd like to just make one point and then invite Stuart to come in. This is obviously a big environmental issue, and the SEPA exists to part of its reason for being is to monitor and tackle environmental problems such as illegal dumping. And one suggestion is that the committee may want to ask SEPA when it comes to give evidence, I think on the 19th of this month, about these issues. But we in the department will have some knowledge of the estimated scale of illegal activity. Stuart might want to comment on that.
Yeah, I don't think I want to say too much. I mean, SEPA will be the people that are best placed to give you a picture for how significant they see this problem for Scotland. I mean, what we do know is that it's a fairly diffuse issue, but undoubtedly there are big pockets of illegal activity that occur. And as I say, there's been 2 or 3 high-profile cases just in the last couple of years, large scale, effectively a landfill site that was illegal. We're not talking about a few thousand tons of something in the corner of a field, a really significant operation. And you also, I think, had heard about a tyre situation as well recently. So, you know, there are some fairly substantial ones. Now, it's not happening all over Scotland all the time. There are pockets of this really significant activity happening, probably some around urban conurbations. There's a lot of work to tackle it. And as I say, I think this extra tool here to go after the evaded tax is going to be a really significant additional deterrent. I mean, there's no doubt that if we want to have a zero-waste society in Scotland, we've got to have the most robust market conditions we can create, because making the right investment in alternatives to landfill, it's a risky business. Profit margins are still thin, and anything that's in the marketplace at the moment that disrupts that lowers the price that you can charge for anyone is very damaging. So it's a real priority for us.
Okay, I mean, obviously, if there's a few thousand tonnes in a field, that alone to me sounds quite alarming, you know, given that, you know, there might be quite a lot of vehicular movements to actually dump it in the corner of a field. I mean, is there a real issue about the lack of enforcement at the moment, the lack of resources for enforcement? I mean, I would have thought that these things would have been, you know, if I had a field just along from my house and suddenly large quantities of tyres or drums of chemicals, whatever, started appearing, I'd be contacting the authorities, I would have thought. I'm sure plenty of other people would be of the same mind. I mean, is there an issue about that which this bill might help address?
There's a lot of work going on, you know, developing better intelligence on this, and it's exactly the point you're raising there, actually. It's that this is treated as the same way any criminal investigation is treated nowadays. You've got to build a strong case, you've got to use intelligence from all sorts of different avenues, and looking to industry to provide intelligence, looking to the public to provide intelligence, and you know, if these are significant things, you have to pull all that together. Police are brought in, and these are major investigations. So I make the point, it's a significant issue. It's definitely not something we want to underestimate at all. I think SEPA will be in a position to give you a really good picture of the sort of work they have ongoing at the moment and the type of activity they're focusing in on. I think we're all looking forward kind of to the extra powers that this bill will give us to clamp down on this.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to our witnesses. Thanks for colleagues for their questions. I'm now going to call a brief recess until 10:55 in order for exchange of witnesses and give members a natural break. Jean, ready to start, Matt? Ready to start? Okay, I shall now reconvene the session. Our third item of business is the second day of the Stage 2 consideration of the Land and Buildings Transaction Tax Scotland Bill. We're joined for this by the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Employment and Sustainable Growth, and I welcome him to the meeting along with Neil Ferguson, John St Clair and Ian Young of the Scottish Government. Members should note that as officials cannot speak on the record at Stage 2, all questions should, as before, be directed to the Cabinet Secretary. Members should have the marshal list of amendments and the groupings. And the question is that sections 44 to 46 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are all agreed. I call Amendment 35 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, group with Amendments 36 and 37. Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 35 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. This is a small group of 3 amendments to Section 47, which gives Scottish Ministers a power to capture the wrapping of residential properties in company structures to avoid LBTT. Such tax avoidance is not welcome in Scotland. These amendments clarify the scope of any regulations made under Section 47. Amendment 35 ensures that the regulations are able to capture the transfer of an interest in a residential property holding company when the company holds property outside Scotland as well as within Scotland. This is needed as the definition of chargeable interest in Section 4 captures property in Scotland only. Regulations made under Section 47 would ensure that the chargeable consideration on which the LBTT payment is based would only be charged in proportion to the property held by the residential property holding company in Scotland. Amendment 36 clarifies that the regulations can specify different LBTT rates and bands for the transfer of an interest in a residential property holding company. Amendment 37 enables the regulations to expand what counts as residential property for the purposes of Section 47. It is imperative that Scottish Ministers are able to regulate to ensure that transfers of residential properties cannot avoid LBTT liability under Section 47 by being held together with some non-residential property in a property holding company. This amendment provides the flexibility to do that. For example, it would enable the regulations to capture any residential property held as part of a larger mixed-use property. I move Amendment 35.
Okay, no members have wished to speak, so any further comments, Cabinet Secretary? None. The question is that Amendment 35 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are all agreed. I call Amendment 36 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 35. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 37 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 35. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 37 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The members are agreed. The question is that 47 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Section 48 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 38 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendments 64, 40, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 65 and 62. Cabinet Secretary move Amendment 38 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Convener, I will speak to Amendments 38, 40, 45, 50 and 62. I will also respond to Amendments 64 and 65 lodged by Gavin Brown. The partnership provisions in the LBTT bill are complex, partly at least because of the complexity and range of commercial transactions which the provisions bring within the scope of tax. We took a conscious decision to closely follow the SDLT provisions in the area of partnerships, knowing that taxpayers and their agents have already been operating the parallel provisions in relation to SDLT for nearly a decade. Despite the complexity, they do deliver policy objectives that I believe deliver fair and reasonable tax outcomes. The first objective is that partnerships should get a partial relief from LBTT when they acquire a chargeable interest from a partner to reflect the partner's retained interest in the property transferred. The same principle should apply when a chargeable interest is taken out of a partnership. Parts 4 and 5 of Schedule 17 currently provide for this. The sum of the lower proportions calculation is used in both and has been used in practice since the SDLT partnership provisions were set out in the Finance Act 2004. It ensures that an appropriate amount of relief is obtained in any particular case. The second policy objective is to ensure that partnerships and transactions involving them should not be a means of avoiding LBTT. Schedule 17 contains a number of different provisions to tackle avoidance. In particular, the schedule ensures that land transactions between partners and partnerships are taxed at the market value of the land in question, rather than the actual price paid, if any. The schedule also provides for certain events following a land transaction to be taxed as if they were land transactions to prevent tax avoidance. For instance, paragraph 17 treats a partnership transfer as a chargeable land transaction if the transfer is pursuant to arrangements in place at the time of the transaction. Paragraph 18 makes further anti-avoidance provision. Thirdly, paragraph 6 of Schedule 17 contains provisions for property investment partnerships known as PIPs. PIPs are partnerships whose sole or main activity is investing in or dealing in a chargeable interest in property. In essence, the provisions aim to prevent the wrapping of land and property in a partnership structure to avoid LBTT liability by ensuring that transactions in such wrapped property are liable to tax. Paragraph 31 of Schedule 17 achieves this by providing that a transfer of an interest in a PIP is treated as a land transaction. I'd like to reiterate, Convener, what I said to the committee on the 22nd of May on the issue of partnership provisions. We commissioned external advice to assist us in looking at options to simplify the provisions. Whilst the recommendations from this work shed some light on the issues, further work is required to explore them and to decide what changes should be implemented. I do not believe that significant changes should be made without further engagement with stakeholders on these important matters and without particularly careful consideration of their effect. So while I accept that there are parts of Schedule 17 that could be simplified or improved, these alterations should not be rushed. Amendment 38 therefore enables Schedule 17 to be amended by subordinate legislation in the future. This would allow the Scottish Government to revise the provisions on partnerships if it was felt necessary following the further work and engagement with stakeholders. Amendment 62 provides that the subordinate legislation would not be Amendment 62 provides that the subordinate legislation would be subject to the affirmative procedure, enabling close parliamentary scrutiny of any future proposals. One way of helping taxpayers and their agents navigate complex areas of tax legislation is to provide clear and comprehensive guidance. In my view, there is scope for addressing complexity in this way through Revenue Scotland working closely with stakeholders. I can therefore say to the committee that I propose that officials working with those outside government who have an interest and are expert in partnership taxation matters should undertake further work on Schedule 17. The aim of this further work would be to identify ways of making the law on the taxation of partnership transactions easier to understand and to operate. I would want this work also to ensure that it remains difficult to avoid paying LBTT. Such work would look at addressing the complexity of the provisions by providing clear guidance. It would also consider whether the legislation itself needs revised. Mr Brown's amendments represent an alternative approach to this issue. They would take out all provisions on partnerships in their entirety. This would leave, in my view, a vacuum in the LBTT framework, and I would like to stress again what I said to the committee on the 22nd of May, that I have no desire to leave a gap in the LBTT bill. I appreciate that what Mr Brown no doubt has in mind is that further work would then be done to examine options and then to recreate an equivalent Schedule 17, which would be added to the Act using subordinate legislation. I accept that this would be an alternative way forward. However, I believe the most effective approach is for officials to work with stakeholders to explore how best to address any shortcomings with the existing provisions, including through clear guidance. I do not want to anticipate the outcome of that further work, but it would be my intention to keep the committee abreast of progress and, if recommendations to amend Schedule 17 emerge, to return to Parliament in due course with legislative proposals for approval. The other amendments I have lodged in relation to the partnership provisions can be classified as tidying up amendments. Amendments 40 and 46 correct minor typographical errors. Amendment 40 inserts a missing is in paragraph 17(1)(a) of Schedule 17. Amendment 46 changes different to difference in paragraph 31(5)(b) of Schedule 17. Amendment 45 ensures that a transfer of an interest in a property investment partnership that holds chargeable interests out with Scotland as well as within Scotland is caught by the LBTT bill. Were we not to introduce this amendment, we would be narrowing the scope of the provisions in Part 6 of Schedule 17 compared to the equivalent provisions for SDLT. Where there is a transfer of an interest in a property investment partnership that holds land in Scotland and outside Scotland, the LBTT chargeable will be in proportion to the property or properties held by the partnership in Scotland only. This is provided for by paragraph 31. Amendments 47, 48 and 49 are all amendments to paragraph 39 of Schedule 17. Their main purpose is to clarify the application of charities relief in Schedule 13 to transfers of partnership interests. Amendment 47 adds a further modification of paragraph 3 of Schedule 13 to clarify what it means to hold property in a partnership for charitable purposes. The way the provision read when the LBTT bill was introduced does not quite make sense and would cause difficulties in practice, as it would only allow charities relief to be claimed in the instance that the transferee was holding the subject matter of a particular transaction, when the test ought to be that the chargeable interest itself is what is held for charitable purposes. Amendment 48 allows charities relief to be claimed when profits are applied to the charitable purposes of the partners rather than just the partner to whom the interest has been transferred. Amendment 49 is a minor consequential amendment to paragraph 39.5 of Schedule 17. The purpose of Amendment 50 is to clarify that a transfer of an interest in a partnership is constituted when a partner either acquires a partnership share or their partnership share increases. This amendment does not constitute a policy change. It merely adds clarity for the uses of the legislation. The position is that a transfer of an interest in a partnership is constituted when a partner either acquires a partnership share or either partnership share increases. In the latter case, an active step is not needed by a partner who is increasing their partnership share as a result of another partner retiring, for example. I move Amendment 38 and apologise for the marathon that was.
Gavin Brown to speak to Amendment 64 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I want to move Amendment 64 and speak to both Amendment 64 and 65. Amendment 64 compels the Scottish Government to make regulations in relation to how the law applies to partnerships as opposed to allowing them to do so. And Amendment 65 leaves out Schedule 17, which deals with provisions for partnerships in its entirety. The reason for lodging these amendments, Convener, is that I think 2 weeks ago in front of this committee we had compelling evidence from the stakeholders, some of which whom the Cabinet Secretary has referred to in previous evidence. I thought we had compelling evidence from them that the partnership provisions as they stand simply do not work. They operate in practice, but in terms of actually being workable both for practitioners and those in terms of partnerships, they simply are not up to the job. We heard a number of interesting adjectives and nouns used to describe how they were in practice, and I won't repeat them today. But they do, in my view, cut against the principles for this bill laid out by the Cabinet Secretary right at the very beginning of the process, or at least three of the principles: the principle of convenience, the principle of efficiency, and the principle of certainty. Look at some of the evidence that we received from the Scottish Property Federation. One of the problems with the SDLT legislation is that it has been built on over and over in 2003, 2004, 2007, 2010, and again in 2013, which does not make for good legislation. I agree with that. That's why I prefer the view of scrapping Schedule 17 and actually building it up from first principles according to what stakeholders believe ought to happen, as opposed to hoping that we can build upon it again and tinker with it. We heard from ICAS, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Scotland. They said this: in many cases there is a complete lack of comprehension of it on the part of people who have worked in the area for many years, including those in HMRC. It does not work, and in many cases is ignored because people do not know that there is a potential liability when transactions happen. I strongly urge you to start again. We heard also that day from the Law Society of Scotland, who said it is often ignored because people do not understand it, and said later that the SDLT partnership rules are based on income sharing ratios. People find that difficult to understand because in real partnerships in the real world there are profit sharing ratios and capital sharing ratios which are different. Automatically, therefore, you are off on the wrong foot. As I said at the beginning of this, Convener, I found these submissions compelling, and I have a huge concern that what we are doing is simply cutting and pasting 19 pages out of the 97 within the bill straight from STLT, which is acknowledged by certain members of this committee and indeed the IFS and the OBR as being a tax which wins numerous prizes for being the worst designed tax. My amendments would make the new regulations mandatory, and in response to the Cabinet Secretary, I mean, I share, I take on board his point that he doesn't want a vacuum at the end of this, but there would only be a vacuum if in April 2015, when this tax is actually applying on the ground, nothing had been put in place. I certainly believe strongly that within the best part of 2 years, given the quality of stakeholders and indeed the bill team on the work that they've done so far, I cannot see, I accept entirely it's complex, I cannot see any reason though why we are not capable of putting in comprehensive, workable partnership provisions built up from first principles that actually apply the principles of the bill that the Cabinet Secretary himself said at the very start of this process.
Thank you. John Mason.
Yes, so I think just perhaps briefly to speak on these two amendments, 64 and 65, that Gavin Brown's been speaking to. I mean, I think the reality is, and the Cabinet Secretary has accepted it, that that there are arguments on both sides of this, but to have something down in black and white now strikes me as giving a degree of certainty, whereas if we have nothing down in black and white and just leave a gap, there is a lot less certainty. So while Gavin Brown might feel that 2 years is plenty of time, and possibly that is the case, to come back with something better, I think I prefer leaving what we have there, and if somebody can come up with something better over the next months and years, then by all means let's have an amendment and let's change that. But I mean, again, I think, I felt speaking to some of the lawyers, and perhaps I'm slightly biased as an accountant, but there is this thinking that if we had any amount of time and we can really start from scratch in an empty room and all the rest of it, we could build up this perfect legislation. But I think that is not quite where we are. It's great that this is the first tax bill we've had in this Parliament, but at the same time we have time constraints, and we're being repeatedly told by witnesses that they want certainty sooner rather than later. So I really think that we'd be going against the certainty principle and the predictability if we were to leave this out altogether. So I do feel it's right to leave it there.
Malcolm?
I find this quite a difficult one, to be honest. It does strike me there's a certain irony in the debate today, since the Cabinet Secretary and indeed John Mason are lifting 17 pages straight out of Westminster legislation, and Gavin Brown saying there it's rubbish, so let's take some more time to deal with it. I mean, I suppose I do find it a difficult decision to make, but I think what may tip the balance is the fact that this legislation is not coming into force for almost 2 years. I think I do take the force of the Cabinet Secretary's argument that you wouldn't normally want to leave a hole in a piece of legislation, a significant gap, but given the time delay, I think that possibly just tips the balance towards Gavin Brown's argument. I mean, I'm tempted to cop out and abstain, but I think on balance I've been persuaded by Gavin Brown today and shall vote for his amendment. Cabinet Secretary to wind up.
I've nothing further to add to the other comments I made, but let me just address some further points on Mr. on Brown's argument. What I said to the committee, and I made this point on the 22nd of May, is that the government has endeavoured to explore in greater detail and substance what would be an alternative approach in this respect. It's not that we've just, with the greatest of respect, cut and paste 17 pages of UK legislation. We have commissioned external input to give us advice on whether there is a better way of going about this, and the recommendations from that work have shed some light on the questions involved, but there is a need for us to undertake further detailed work before we could commit to any further legislation. That therefore leads me inevitably to the conclusion that despite the best endeavours that we have undertaken to date, there is not a compelling alternative proposition that would be superior to the provisions that we have inserted in the bill in this respect. That therefore leads me to the conclusion that we would be leaving a vacuum, because I can't, whatever the compulsion of the amendment that is there from Mr Brown, we might find ourselves back where we started when we eventually come to fill that vacuum in the bill, which we would have to do, or we would be leaving the door wide open to potential evasion of tax, which I don't think the committee will want to do. I have to say that I've looked again at the evidence that the committee heard. I don't find the evidence compelling. The witnesses suggested that the legislation operates but doesn't work. I'm afraid I don't understand that sentence. If something operates, then it must work. It's a rather incoherent argument to put forward. So my view is that the provisions are complex. That is because we are dealing with a very complex area of business activity, and therefore what the right thing to do is to put the legislation in place as we have suggested, to resist the amendments that Gavin Brown has moved, and then explore, as we have already done in relation to the question of leases with stakeholders, how we can formulate alternative propositions, if that can be the case. And I stress to the committee, this is not a given that we can do that, because we have done part of this exercise already and not found ourselves to be in a position where the material is any better or stronger than what is in the bill at the present moment. So I would encourage the committee to resist the temptation of leaving a vacuum in the bill, and acknowledge that there is a good intention to try to deliver improved provisions if we can, but that is by no means guaranteed from the evidence and the work that we've undertaken so far.
Okay. The question is, Amendment 38 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are all agreed. I call Amendment 64 in the name of Gavin Brown, already debated with Amendment 38. Gavin Brown to move or not to move?
Move, Convener.
The question is, Amendment 64 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
We are not agreed. We will therefore go to a vote. All those in favour of Amendment 64, please raise your hands. All those against? The amendment is defeated. The question is, that Section 49 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are all agreed. I call Amendment 39 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendments 41, 42, 43, 44, 54, 55, 53, 53A, 56, 57, 58, 59, 61 and 63. Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 39 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I'll speak to Amendments 39, 41 to 44, 55, 54, 55, 53, 56 to 61 and 63. I will also respond to Amendment 53A lodged by Gavin Brown. The key amendment here is Amendment 53, which introduces a new schedule to the bill to deal with the tax treatment of leases under land and buildings transaction tax. The new schedule sets out the detailed rules for taxing leases. Broadly speaking, the tax chargeable for a lease will be determined by calculating the tax due on the rent, using the net present value of the rent payable over the length of a lease, plus the tax due on any premium paid in addition to rent. The schedule describes this as a consideration other than rent. The schedule sets out how to calculate the net present value of the rent payable. Although this appears to be quite a complicated calculation, it is widely accepted as the most appropriate way of calculating the value for tax purposes of a stream of rental payments over a number of years. The calculation has three elements. First, the temporal discount rate, which the bill sets initially at the same rate as is currently used for stamp duty land tax of 3.5%. The discount rate can be varied by order subject to parliamentary process. The effect of applying this rate is to calculate the value today, the present value of rents that will be paid in the future. The second element of the calculation is the length of term of the lease, and the third element is the amount of rent payable. Once the length of term of the lease and the rental payable have been determined, the statutory formula set out at paragraph 6 of the schedule is used to calculate the net present value of rental payments. It is this amount on which tax due is based. Scottish taxpayers are familiar with this formula, as it is very similar to the formula used to calculate the net present value for leases to be taxed under stamp duty land tax. Taxpayers and their agents will have access to an online calculator to assist them with this calculation. Once the net present value of the rental payments has been calculated, the tax liability can be arrived at by applying the rental rates and the relevant rates and thresholds. Leases very often include a consideration other than rent also, for example, a premium payment made up front. This also has to be taxed, since otherwise such arrangements could be used to minimise the rental payable and therefore the tax due. Tax due on the non-rental element of the consideration will be calculated in the same way as tax on chargeable consideration, generally. So section 25, amount of tax chargeable of the bill, for instance, will apply. The schedule also provides that after submitting their initial tax return, a tenant must carry out a review of the tax due based on the rent actually paid in the period. The review period is every 3 years. The tenant must make a tax return to Revenue Scotland at each review date and at the end of the lease. This ensures that the tenant pays the correct amount of tax over the term of the lease by providing a mechanism for adjusting the tax due and paid if the rental or other payments under the lease vary over time. Other changes, such as extensions to the duration of the lease or where the lease continues beyond its end date by tacit relocation, will also be recognised and accounted for through the review process. This approach has been discussed in detail with the Law Society of Scotland and other relevant stakeholders in the Working Group on Non-Residential Leases. It is considered to have advantages over the current system, which applies to calculating tax due on leases under stamp duty land tax. For example, it provides greater certainty about the timing of recalculations of tax payable and therefore about tax payments. The revised system also places fewer obligations on the tenant to submit a tax return during the period of the lease. It will no longer be necessary to submit a return every time the rent changes. As an example of this, the rental payable under some leases is based on turnover and the rent changes annually depending on turnover figures. Under LBTT, additional returns will be limited to the 3-yearly return and the return at the end of the lease. In short, any recalculation of the tax chargeable will generally only occur every 3 years. I'm grateful to the members of the Working Group on Non-Residential Leases for their invaluable input into the preparation of the detailed rules for taxing leases, which are set out in the schedule before the committee today. The work of the group demonstrates what can be done in terms of joint working to achieve an outcome that is suitable to Scotland. I'm sure it has not escaped the committee's notice that the lease schedule runs to over 15 pages. This demonstrates the complexities and technicalities that arise when seeking to apply taxation fairly and reasonably to the range of commercial situations that arise perfectly legitimately under property law. That said, the system I have outlined above is, in the view of experts in this field, now better aligned with Scots law and practices. It will therefore better serve taxpayers in Scotland than the current UK stamp duty land tax system. The dialogue with the Non-Residential Leases Working Group to refine the leases schedule is continuing, and a further meeting of the group has been arranged for the 11th of June. Following these discussions, it is possible that more amendments will be required to the leases provisions at Stage 3. At Stage 3, I will also bring forward technical amendments to earlier parts of the bill, which were considered at last week's committee Stage 2 session. All of the other amendments before the committee today are consequential technical amendments to sections in the bill, and Schedules 17 and 19 in particular, necessitated by the schedule on leases being introduced by Amendment 53. I move Amendment 39.
Thank you. Gavin Brown to speak to Amendment 53A and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I'll only address Amendment 53A, but before I do that, I must acknowledge, I think, the great work done by the working group and indeed the bill team in relation to leases, which I think has had wide acceptance from the evidence that this committee has received. One simple amendment, Convener, in relation to this, looking at the rates that would be applied to leases. Under SDLT, I'm advised that there are currently two rates, 0% or 1%. My amendment to Amendment 50, my amendment to the Cabinet Secretary's amendment gives the Scottish Government, in my view, flexibility to mirror the situation south of the border or not. But being different would therefore be a proactive decision. I'm not sure what the government's thinking is exactly at the moment in relation to the rates they want to apply, or what the whether there would be 2 bands or 3 bands or 4 bands or more. But as it stands, they would be locked into having a nil rate band and at least 2 other rates, which would mean they couldn't possibly mirror what happens south of the border. They may not want to mirror it, but they may want to mirror it when the time comes to set the rates, and therefore for that reason I've lodged this amendment to keep it entirely flexible, and it gives the Scottish Government the option to follow exactly what happens south of the border, or to do whatever they like when the time comes to make the decision. Thank you.
Okay, Malcolm.
I hesitate to speak, having made one mistake this morning already, but I don't think Gavin's allowed to reply, which is perhaps I don't know if he is or not. I think that might be a problem with the procedure in our Parliament, but my reading of his amendment is that there is no flexibility, because it seems to say a nil rate tax band and 1 other tax band, so that I'm not quite sure how that does give the flexibility.
On the member.
Okay.
I mean, if you read it in conjunction with what the Cabinet Secretary said, it's not just 1, it's basically replacing 2 with 1, so it could be actually 1 or 2 or 3 or as many as the Scottish Government likes.
Malcolm?
Am I allowed to come back as well?
Of course.
I think I'll have to. That's not my reading of it, and I don't really understand the point that Gavin Brown makes. But we won't need to. We don't need to delay it, because I'm not going to vote for his amendment anyway.
Come back in, and then Malcolm can come back in if he wants. On you go, John.
Okay, intervene on you, yes. Is this like a speech, is it? Yes. If I'm reading it correctly, and Gavin Brown can correct me if it's wrong, the at least is staying there. So we're just replacing the 2 other tax bands with 1 other tax band. So it will still say at least 1 other tax band, and therefore that could be 1 or it could be more, I think.
Okay, I understand the point. I've made 2 mistakes this morning. So,
Okay, Cabinet Secretary to wind up.
If I could address the issues raised by Mr Brown in Amendment 53A. Paragraph 32A of Amendment 53 lodged in my name provides for duty on Scottish Ministers to set a nil rate band and at least 2 other tax bands. This reflects the move to a progressive tax structure and is in keeping with the provisions in the bill for setting tax bands for other land transactions, such as purchases of property. Gavin Brown's Amendment 53A would change Amendment 53 so that Scottish Ministers would be under a duty to set a nil rate band and at least 1 other band, and that's the point which the committee's just had an extensive debate about, is the retention of the crucial 2 words of at least. Interest in this would allow Scottish Ministers to replicate the approach to SDLT if Ministers choose to do so. However, Mr Brown's amendment, as he has just said, would not prevent Scottish Ministers from having a nil rate band and 2 or more other bands for non-residential leases. So in the interests of progress and consensus, I'm prepared to accept Amendment 53A that Mr Brown has moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 39 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendments 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49 and 50, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated. I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendments 40 to 50 en bloc.
Moved en bloc, Convener.
The members agreed that we should move these en bloc in a single question.
Yes.
Therefore, the members are agreed. The question is that Amendments 40 to 50 are agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 65 in the name of Gavin Brown, already debated with Amendment 38. Gavin Brown to move or not move?
Without Amendment 64, I don't think it makes sense, so not moved.
Right, okay, so you're not moving it. So the question is that Schedule 17 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I call Amendment 51 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendment 52.
Thank you, Convener. A bare trust arrangement is used when a trust is used to hold...
Cabinet Secretary, I've got to ask the question, is it section 50 be agreed to? Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. Apologies for that. I call Amendment 51 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary group with Amendment 52.
Convener, a bare trust arrangement is used when a trust is used to hold assets for a minor or a person with a disability, or when a trustee is appointed to hold property as nominee for somebody else. At present, the beneficiary of a bare trust will be liable to pay LBTT. However, bare trusts are also sometimes set up to keep the beneficiary's identity and interests confidential, and this may present opportunities for tax avoidance. Because of this, the policy memorandum for the bill included an intention to explore the possibility of bringing forward a Stage 2 amendment to make the bare trustee liable for LBTT, rather than the current position where the beneficiary is liable. I have now considered this further. I have come to the conclusion that reversing the position for LBTT so that the liability falls on the bare trustee could create complications and unintended consequences. It is notable that in a number of taxes, including income tax and capital gains tax, it is the beneficiary who is liable to pay the tax in question where the liability arises in respect of a bare trust. Instead, I believe a better approach to tackling the problem is that proposed in Amendment 51. Amendment 51 will give Revenue Scotland a right of recovery against a bare trustee, in addition to any ability it has to recover tax from the beneficiary of a bare trust. Revenue Scotland could use this right of recovery, for example, where the beneficiary has failed to make a tax return, or where, following an inquiry, there is an outstanding tax due in relation to a transaction. Amendment 52 is a consequential amendment on Amendment 51, and I would move Amendment 51.
Okay, anything further, Cabinet Secretary?
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add. The question is, Amendment 51 be agreed to? Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 52 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with Amendment 51. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
The question is, Amendment 52 be agreed to? Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is, that Schedule 18 be agreed to? Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is, that 51 be agreed. Section 51 be agreed to? Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 30 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with Amendment 4. On day 1, Cabinet Secretary move formally.
Formally moved.
The question is, that Amendment 30 be agreed to? Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is, that Sections 32 to 54 be agreed to?
52 to 52.
Did I say 32? Sorry, 50. I'm reading one thing and saying something else here. The question is that sections 52 to 54 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 54 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with Amendment 39. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Move, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 54 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Section 55 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 55 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with Amendment 39. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Move, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 55 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 53 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with Amendment 39. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Move, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 53A be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. Minister to press or withdraw Amendment 53.
Move.
The question is that Amendment 53 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Section 56 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 31 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with Amendment 12 on day 1. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Formally moved.
The question is that Amendment 31 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 56 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with Amendment 39. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 56 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Section 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Sections 58 to 61 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 57 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with Amendment 39. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Section 62 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Sections 63 to 65 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendments 58, 59, 60 and 61, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated. I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendments 58 to 61 on block.
Moved on block, Convener.
Colleagues happy to have that agreed on block?
Yes. Yeah.
The question is that amendments 58 to 61 are agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Schedule 19 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The question is that Section 66 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendment 62 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with Amendment 38. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Move, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 62 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendment 66 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, group with Amendment 67. Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 66 and speak to both amendments in the group.
Convener, at present the Bill makes provision for tax rates and tax bands to be set by order. The Bill also provides that the order for the first setting of tax rates and bands for land transactions other than non-residential leases is subject to the affirmative procedure. Subsequent orders that might change tax rates or bands are, as things stand, subject to the negative procedure. Amendment 66 provides for the first order that sets tax rates and bands for non-residential leases to be subject to the affirmative procedure. Amendment 67 provides for subsequent orders that change tax rates or bands for all land transactions, including non-residential leases, to be subject to the provisional affirmative procedure. This would allow for a change to the tax rates and bands by subsequent orders to be made with immediate effect, subject to parliamentary approval within 28 days. These amendments fulfil the commitment I made in response to the Subordinate Legislation Committee report on the LBTT Bill at Stage 1. My letter to the Subordinate Legislation Committee stated, and I quote, I intend to bring forward an amendment at Stage 2 to provide that the power in Section 24(1) will be subject to a form of provisional affirmative procedure after the first occasion that the bands and rates are set. This will allow the Scottish Government the necessary flexibility to respond swiftly to changes in the property market. I move Amendment 66.
Anything further to add then, Cabinet Secretary?
Nothing to add.
The question is that Amendment 66 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. I call Amendments 32, 63 and 67, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated. I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendments 32, 63 and 67 on block.
It moved on block, Convener.
Ask if any member objects to a single question being put on Amendments 32, 63 and 67. No one objects. The question therefore is that Amendments 32, 63 and 67 are agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Section 67 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. The question is that Sections 68 to 70 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The question is that a long title be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are. And that, Cabinet Secretary, ends Stage 2 consideration of the bill. Members should note that the bill will now be reprinted as amended and will be available in print and on the web tomorrow morning. The Parliament has not yet determined when Stage 3 will take place, but members can now lodge Stage 3 amendments at any time with the legislation team. Members will be informed of the deadline for amendments once it has been determined. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Secretary and his team for their attendance today, and I'm sure you'll all be glad that that is now completion of Stage 2. I certainly am. Okay, thank you very much. At the start of the meeting, the committee agreed to take the next item in private. I therefore close the public part of the meeting. I'll just have a couple of minutes recess in order to allow the public and official report to leave.